The world is largely asleep. Digital paper money, or fiat as we know it today, is a big problem because they can just print it easily. And there is no way to audit the supply or control it. So that is how money gets corrupted. What Bitcoin does is it brings it back to the origin of money, which is there is no physical form to Bitcoin. If you know 12 words, you have your money. What this indicates to me is the entire fiat system is on its last legs. These are the death throes of the fiat system. It's almost over. And I believe these things are more sudden than gradual. I believe it's much sooner than that, simply because these transitions are very fast and very violent.
Very violent.
The amount of people that understand Bitcoin and can talk intelligently about Bitcoin is probably less than, I don't know, 1% of the population. Then you have more percentages that kind of have it, are exposed to it. But by and large, most people don't really understand. And they don't even understand the legacy monetary system. So you have a huge gap in understanding there. But reality kind of destroys that. So when nobody wants fiat money, then nobody will want fiat money. It'll be a very sharp drop-off. If you look at history, there's many examples in history of money just being worthless in a period of weeks and months. There's the 10,000 limit for moving cash across borders. But if you go back in time when that law was first passed, the real value of that money back then was like 80,000 because they're fixed on these numbers that are getting more worthless all the time. And the reason it's getting more worthless is because, one, you're printing more of it, but two, you're eliminating a key property of money, which is it has to free flow.
When a government has Bitcoin, who's holding the private key?
Well, that's an interesting one.
Right.
So there's a big push for green energy. And green energy is not green. It's sort of a scam to let the government pay companies that do specific things and subsidize them. And maybe money comes back and lines someone's pocket. Who knows? There is no energy shortage. It's an intelligence shortage. But there's always a reason behind the narrative. Follow the money. Long term, Bitcoin will keep appreciating to 1 million a coin, to 3 million a coin, to 10 million a coin.
Do you actually think it's going to go to 1 million?
Yeah.
How long does it take?
Within the next year.
Really? A mil?
Yeah.
A Bitcoin. In the future, let's say in 20 years, how many Bitcoin do you need to be seen as doing okay? I believe there's a small group of people that know who Satoshi is.
Got the whole crypto world going wild. Money blockchain, she's the queen of the game. Stacking crypto like it's her claim to fame. If you want success, then take a look away.
Hi, Samson.
Hi, Bonnie.
Welcome to Taipei.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
What's your first impression of Taiwan?
It's hot.
It is really hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I like the city. It's a beautiful city. The air is pretty good and you have open spaces, so it's nice.
We're going to talk about Bitcoin today. Really exciting stuff. But for people that are unfamiliar, what's your journey like into Bitcoin?
When I first started getting interested in Bitcoin, it was 2011 or 2013. So you're just kind of reading about it through the news, and most of it's very negative.
Right.
And then I think I caught one article in 2013, which was talking about Bitcoin mining. So prior to reading that one, I just assumed it was some sort of digital money that someone made. But then when I read the mining article, I decided to follow the guide to set up your own mining operation. I tried to set it up on my laptop, and it's too late to mine on a laptop then, but going through that whole process showed me that there is actually nobody controlling the network.
Right.
So the supply is produced by these nodes on the network, the mining nodes. And that was when it kind of clicked for me that this is a unique innovation. But I was still very busy with work, so I didn't have time to, get into the industry until late 2014, early 2015 when I joined BTC China.
Wait, how do you get from there to BTC China?
So my friend Bobby was the CEO at the time.
Right.
We're in Shanghai near the Shanghai Stadium. So he's on the one side, I was on the other side. So he asked me to be an advisor first to build the mobile team. So I would just go over in the afternoon a couple days a week and help him out. And then I was formally an advisor, and then I was appointed COO.
From an article or one of your interviews, you said the tokenomics of Bitcoin and game tokens are similar, and it clicks for you.
They're both digital assets, right? I was interested in digital assets because I came from that world, both playing and building in it. But Bitcoin kind of showed me that there's another way, because when you have a game economy, you're pretty much anchored to the company. You're anchored to the monetary policy and everything from the developer. Game economies, it's the game developer, operator that decides what's the inflation rate? And
Yeah.
having built these online games, I've had to manage that myself too. So if the money supply is increasing too much, you need to create more sinks,
Right.
you know, and create reasons for players to spend their money.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you get hyperinflation.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the quote unquote real economy with the Fed, right? They raise rates to try to rein things in and they try to manage it. But I think Bitcoin is different because there is no one managing it. You have a protocol that's based off of math, and that's it. There's no negotiation with Bitcoin. If the price is low, not much you can do.
Right.
Price is high, that's it.
Yeah. Inflation and interest rate, the government is actually encouraging you to spend. Otherwise, I would just put my cash under my bed, right? Because I expect things to be more expensive in the future. And it's good for the economy. So what about Bitcoin? Like, people see this fiat system and say that is broken, but is it really broken?
I would say so. So fiat is an abomination. It should not exist. If you go to the origin of money, it's peer-to-peer. It is just people doing things and trading with one another. Money is a layer for trade. So if I specialize in making hats and you specialize in, I don't know, growing apples, we can trade one hat for, I don't know, 3 apples or something like that.
Yeah.
But if I don't need an apple or you don't want a hat, then I can owe you and I can still take the apple from you.
Right.
So money is really a layer for us to trade. And then when you network that over the planet with all humanity, you kind of have this invisible layer of money. And that's anchored to the physical realm historically through things like seashells, salt,
Right.
Gold, and paper. And now digitized paper, but controlled by centralized parties. But the origin of money is, it's just a invisible ledger. And when you try to bring it down to the real world and give it a physical property or physical attribute, that's an attack vector. It's a weak point because someone can now control the ledger.
Right.
So if you have gold as your money, wherever you put your gold, that's a attack vector. They can switch it out, lend it, and just fill the vault with lead painted gold.
Yeah.
If it's paper money, well, actually, paper money is kind of okay if you recognize it, but you have counterfeiting. But digital paper money, or fiat as we know it today, is a big problem because they can just print it easily, and there is no way to audit the supply or control it. So that is how money gets corrupted. What Bitcoin does is it brings it back to the origin of money, which is there is no physical form to Bitcoin. If you know 12 words, you have your money. So I think this is a restoration of money back to what it must be, which is dematerialized and singular in purpose, which is tracking value transfer.
I read this article that MIT's listed down like 10 top tech of 2024, and one of them is quantum computing. And apparently, quantum computing would be able to break the encryption system in years.
It is theoretically possible,
Right.
but we're nowhere near that happening. Quantum computing could potentially attack Bitcoin, right? One is public-private key generation,
Yeah.
guessing your private key. The other would be mining, surpassing the Bitcoin mining network now and getting the nonce and getting the blocks. So let's break those two things apart. So the first one is the breaking of basic public-private key encryption. When that happens, I think there are bigger problems because that will stop
Yes.
general e-commerce around the world and even more dangerous things like nuclear launch codes and the like. So I think there are more problems to be solved as a whole from humanity than let's just worry about quantum computing killing Bitcoin. The other part is the mining. If quantum computing does become a real thing, it's not there yet. I still am not sure it would be able to compete with mining as we have it today with ASICs, because you'll have one quantum computer when it emerges. It'll be very expensive and very difficult to maintain. And you'll have competition with millions and millions of ASICs that are all working in parallel. One quantum computer is not likely able to compete with all of the Bitcoin hashing power because you can just add more and more. But I don't think we're at a stage yet where you can simply build another quantum computer. There's not even able to get really one kind of really working
So
yet.
it's more like a concept.
I would think so, but the
Right.
media loves to.
Yeah, because it got me
Throw
really
it out
worried.
there.
I'm like, what?
Well, it's just bad reporting. Some reporter says, "What are Bitcoin threats?" And then hypothetically, quantum
Oh,
computing,
oh,
and then they run with it without doing any actual research into the state of quantum computing.
And they put down like 2025 or something. And I'm like, wow, that's so soon.
Well, we should have been in an ice age in 1980, right? So
That is true. That is true. You're the CEO of Gen3. Can you tell us what do you do?
Gen3 is a Bitcoin tech company, and our focus is on accelerating Bitcoin adoption around the world. So to do that, we work with governments, politicians at the top-down level, and at the bottom-up level, we have our Aqua wallet, which is a Bitcoin and Layer 2 wallet, which is meant to get grassroots adoption and help spin up new circular economies. So things like Bitcoin Beach, Bitcoin Jungle, in other places around the world, they can use the wallet to onboard people to the Bitcoin network.
Can you explain more on Bitcoin Jungle and Bitcoin Beach?
So these are little communities that started
okay.
out just using Bitcoin
Right.
because of necessity. So in Costa Rica, if you're a foreigner, you cannot get a local bank account. So they just started using Bitcoin to pay local merchants, and local merchants started accepting it. Now there's an integration with the banking system through SinPay. So they can kind of onboard people to take Bitcoin, and they can convert it to the local money. These local economies that are Bitcoin fueled, you can go and live off Bitcoin in all these tiny little economies.
So let's say I buy a sandwich every day and it's $5. But if I pay in Bitcoin, how do I calculate the value?
It'll be using the price feed of whatever wallet you're paying with. So
Right.
they'll price it in pesos or in whatever, and you'll pay in Bitcoin, but denominated in fiat.
Is that how you see the world, or do you see the world in Bitcoin standard?
The world is running on a dollar standard right now, right? But what we're going to is a Bitcoin standardized world. But there's probably 5 to 10 years before we hit that point. So our slogan is we're accelerating hyper-Bitcoinization at Gen3. So that's the point at which you no longer convert Bitcoin to fiat money. And people don't want fiat money at that point. They only want Bitcoin. So they won't even accept dollars. The point of hyper-Bitcoinization and hyperinflation are sort of one and the same. It just becomes a transition to Bitcoin, and you don't want the dollars anymore.
In Nigeria, I think sometime last year, they were switching currency. Like they had an old currency and they want to remove it. And people are trying to get USD instead, but they couldn't because there's a shortage. So do you think Bitcoin adoption is easier in weaker economy? Because there's an incentive.
Well, there's a necessity.
Right.
So they need Bitcoin. And that was why in Africa you see many regions with a premium on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And it just has to do with government controls, right? They don't want you to have access to anything else. They want you to use their local currency. And it was the same situation in Argentina, where the bank had one rate, and then you have the blue rate, the street real rate, right? So, nobody really recognizes the bank rate. It's always the market rate.
Right.
And the market always wins. You can't fight the market. And we're seeing that with the Japanese yen. They're fighting the market, and they're not successful. But what this indicates to me is the entire fiat system is on its last legs. These are the death throes of the fiat system. It's almost over. And I believe these things are more sudden than gradual. I believe it's much sooner than that, simply because these transitions are very fast and very violent.
Very violent. Help me visualize. Like 5 years.
It's because the world is largely asleep.
Right.
Like the amount of people that understand Bitcoin and can talk intelligently about Bitcoin is probably less than, I don't know, 1% of the population. Then you have more percentages that kind of have it, are exposed to it. But by and large, most people don't really understand. And they don't even understand the legacy monetary system. So you have a huge gap in understanding there. But reality kind of destroys that. So when nobody wants fiat money, then nobody will want fiat money. It'll be a very sharp drop-off. And they may not understand why, but they will experience it firsthand when you can't buy gas or raw materials like resources, petroleum, liquefied natural gas, all these things. The seller will just want Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So that will just happen very quickly, and it'll just change. There'll be a day when the merchant just doesn't want it anymore because it's worthless. If you look at history, there's many examples in history of money just being worthless in a period of weeks and months.
It's so hard to imagine. Currency is a way for a government to actually have control over its people, right?
But it's not supposed to. There is no reason for governments to have control over the money supply. It was just kind of slipped in.
Right.
And the concept of central banking is actually a communist tenet. It's a core part of communism to centralize the banking and have a central bank. So you have to ask yourself, why do we have central banks today when we're against communism and against collectivism? There's something wrong with the whole world. I think there was a talk from Snowden. I forgot which event, but he was asking the audience, do you feel the state of the world is normal right now, where you're electing a president that's kind of the best of the worst? You're not electing someone you're proud of that represents the best ideals of humanity, but you're just kind of hoping to get someone that's not so bad.
Right.
But it's the whole state of the world. Everything is kind of wrong. And I see Bitcoin is a driving force to right those wrongs in the world by fixing the money supply. So if you go back to the original point I was making about the origin of money, that money is not a material thing, and it should not be, that is fixing a key part of civilization, because trade and the ability for us to interact with one another through trade is the basis of civilization. Therefore, money is the basis of human civilization. Otherwise, we could not do things like specialize in different things, like, you know, YouTuber, podcaster, or farmer, or doctor, or engineer. So all the things that we have today are because we can specialize, and we can specialize because we can trade and use money to trade.
Help me imagine what the world would be like without different currencies.
You'll still have currency. It'll be Bitcoin. You have to have some layer for settlement of trade. The question is, what is that layer? Is it paper or a ledger at the Federal Reserve, or is it Bitcoin? But there is always something to do that. Otherwise, you go back to a barter economy, and then you can't really specialize again. You might as well make your own hat at that point,
Right.
than to find someone that will trade with you at that given point. So money has to exist, and uncorruptible money is the key to the future. And we were doing okay when we had gold, but gold is easily corruptible because it's hard to move.
Right.
But if money is information and Bitcoin is simply information, and we embrace Bitcoin to be money, then we can fix that problem, because now it is easy to move and easy to store.
Gen 3 helps government adopt this Bitcoin plan or Bitcoin system, right? How do you convince the governments to adopt Bitcoin? Because the idea of decentralization is against their interest.
That's another question that we should be asking. If you look at government interventions, they usually don't work very well. If the government backs away, is smaller, less impactful, is a far better thing. So if you look at Argentina as a case study, there's a famous video that went viral of Milei ripping things off the board, all the government agencies. And now you can see that they have a surplus. Inflation is declining. And then he stopped regulation of the rental market, the housing market. And now there's an abundance of supply. So all they had to do is get out of the way, and the market will solve a lot of these problems. So the question is really, what value does the government add if they are in the mix? And I think it's a negative value in many cases, because you're electing people that are not necessarily experts at what they're supposed to be managing. So I think having the government removed from many things, especially money supply, money management, is a big benefit, because it corrupts the whole system in the end. Like in Canada, the Central Bank of Canada, Bank of Canada, is effectively an ATM for the government. There is no clear separation, and there is no clear governance. It's just they need money, we print money.
Yeah. But they can argue, oh, I use this money for healthcare or other things.
Ask someone in Canada, how is healthcare in Canada? How is it declined over the last 10 plus years? It's basically, it doesn't work anymore, because they also have limits on how much doctors can get paid. So there is a shortage of doctors now.
Speaking of the prime minister or vice prime minister, Yeah. That there was a clip of her trying to freeze someone's bank account.
Oh yeah, they do that too.
Yeah. And I was like, oh wow, that's government having too much power. And when you say Bitcoin can fix all that, is this what you mean, what you just said?
Well, yes. If we have a separation of money and state, which is not that the state doesn't have money, it's that they can't control the money supply, then they can't freeze your bank account. And I think that is a key part of democracy. The other end of it is pushing out a CBDC.
Right.
And that is far worse. So at least right now, the government is a little bit removed. So if we go back to Canada as an example with the Freedom Convoy and the truckers protesting, the government wanted to freeze accounts, but they can't freeze it directly. They still need to go and ask the banks to freeze it. But with a CBDC, they don't need to ask anybody.
It's insane.
And then you implement social credit.
Yeah.
And then it's just an automated system at that point.
It seems like the world is going that way.
Well, the world wants to go that way.
Yeah.
But Bitcoin is counteracting that. So Bitcoin is a force for freedom, whereas the current system as it stands is tending towards control.
Right. But then your job is to convince these governments, hey, that's better.
The way we approach it at Jan 3 is purely from an alignment of incentives path. So governments want money. Bitcoin is money. If you have energy, you can mine Bitcoin. You can use that Bitcoin to build roads, airports, trains, whatever you like. Governments need money at the end of the day. So we're sort of trying to educate them that this is the new money and you need to be cognizant that this is money now, right? There should be no distaste for Bitcoin. Reason you have gold reserves is because gold is valuable. Now, if you're the Taiwanese government, maybe you don't think gold is valuable. But if the US thinks gold is valuable, then it is valuable because you can, use it to buy something from the US.
Right, right.
So it's not really what you believe or what any government believes. We're just trying to show them that this is the new money. This is the new reserve asset of the world. And you should probably think about getting a little bit of it for many reasons. And we're seeing a change in discourse now where many governments and many politicians have started embracing Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is now a key issue in the US election, the largest economy on the planet. How can the Taiwanese government ignore that and just look the other way?
Because it's so hard to regulate, right?
Well, you shouldn't need to regulate money. Over-regulation is also a problem. And I think this is why money has largely lost its value as money, because it's being used as a surveillance tool. Even in the US, if you send someone $600, you have to report that transaction. Denominations are getting more worthless. So what is $600 in 2 years? What is 600 in 3 years? It might be your lunch.
Yeah.
But they never boost the limits, right? There's the 10,000 limit for moving cash across borders. But if you go back in time when that law was first passed, the real value of that money back then was like 80,000.
Wow.
But the number doesn't change.
Yeah.
So eventually you'll only be able to bring enough money across the border to eat, right?
That is insane.
And then
Yeah, that's a good point.
But yeah, like all of these numbers, the system is broken because they're fixed on these numbers that are getting more worthless all the time. And the reason it's getting more worthless is because, one, you're printing more of it, but two, you're eliminating a key property of money, which is it has to free flow.
Yes.
If you look at growing economies where people invest, they invest in places where they can move money in and out easily.
Yes.
Nobody wants to invest in a place where there's a big door in and a small door out because, there's risk. There's political risk. There's many reasons you want to be able to move capital in and out quickly. And the growth that we've seen in Asia in the past, I think, is from free flow of capital. And as countries develop, they kind of dial it back and go into a protectionism mode and try to keep what they have. And they don't realize that not having money moving easily is a detriment. But I think that gives opportunity to other countries in the world. If you look at Latin America, you can see they're embracing money. They want money. If you look at El Salvador, what they did by making Bitcoin legal tender, they're saying, bring your Bitcoin and spend it here so that people can earn Bitcoin. And the president there understands that Bitcoin will go up because he is a Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
And then your people will accumulate wealth. They'll be able to send their kids to better schools, create companies, businesses, and grow from there. But if you're just contracting, protecting what you have, you'll decline. And the good counter example to El Salvador, I think, is Japan. You've had decades of stagnation and problems, ballooning debt to GDP ratio, 260 some odd %. That's completely unsustainable. There's population decline because there's no hope for the future.
That is true.
And it's too expensive to have children now. So what you get is a death spiral. You can't tax the population to generate prosperity. You need to create conditions for prosperity. So many ways.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like Japan is famously very high tax, especially on crypto, right?
Okay, yeah.
So who is going to want to be there to use Bitcoin or anything else to generate money or build a business there, unless you're attacking that market specifically and you have a regulatory moat. But if you're a free market company, why would you domicile in Japan? Why would you hire people there?
You probably won't.
You probably won't.
Yeah.
You'll go somewhere else where it's more favorable. But then they want to tax everything, and eventually it'll just end because you can't get blood from a stone. You can keep squeezing it, but then the people will just suffer.
When a government has Bitcoin, who's holding the private key?
Well, that's an interesting one. So I think El Salvador now, they have a local storage system. I think it's multi-sig.
Okay.
But yeah, that could be a way. Or you could have regulated custodians. I mean, there is one thing the government should be good at, and that should be keeping people's things safe, right? Both your property, enforcing property rights, and creating rules where companies can't go rogue and do whatever they like. That's, I think, one value add from government. So there should be regulated custodians that cannot mess around and lose people's money. And theoretically, the government should be able to use those systems or an array of those systems and some systems out of country to do multi-sig and protect their funds.
I haven't been to El Salvador. And does it look different, or do they behave differently? I don't know. Like, how does it work to have Bitcoin as a legal tender?
The level of education, I think we have to be honest, it's not there yet.
Right.
There are still lots of merchants that don't accept Bitcoin. And I think even within the government, it's not everyone is orange pilled yet.
Right.
So it is a process. And I think sometimes we gloss over that and say, it's the perfect Bitcoin country. It's still getting to where it is going, and it's on a good trajectory, but there's still work to be done.
Right. So it just means you can, let's say if I want to buy a house, I can actually pay in Bitcoin.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, that's nice.
So it's a start. It's a good start.
It is a good start.
Yeah.
On the energy, you said there are countries with extra energy and they can use that to mine Bitcoin. But, all over media, I'm not an energy expert, but I just assume, like there's energy shortage everywhere.
I think that has more to do with policy.
Right.
So there's a big push for green energy. And green energy is not green. It's sort of a scam to let the government pay companies that do specific things and subsidize them. And maybe money comes back and lines someone's pocket. Who knows? But most of these things are not really green. If you look at solar panels, it's kind of a dumb technology to roll out at scale. If you're in a remote area, like you have a cabin and you have no way to generate electricity, yeah, it makes sense. Put up a solar panel. But to create solar farms to try to compete with more efficient energy production technologies, even coal, it's sort of like greenwashing. You kind of use the coal to make the solar panel, and then it's okay, and then it gets destroyed. You would have been better off burning the coal.
Right.
And just have some filtration system. But the push to do that, I think, has set back humanity by decades, instead of building nuclear. But there is a shift, and you can see the shift, where in the US, they're starting to talk more favorably about nuclear, because I think they realize they need energy. And maybe this is a benefit of the AI, advancements, but they're realizing that because of AI's need for compute.
Yeah.
They're not realizing it because of first principles thinking and science, but they're realizing it because AI needs energy and, okay, well, this is not going to cut it. Solar is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Or wind is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Right? It's too intermittent. So we need nuclear. So whatever it is, we seem to be shifting in the right direction that we need energy. There is no energy shortage. It's an intelligence shortage.
Right.
We have had good energy with nuclear, and nuclear is the future. We need to keep pushing on nuclear, and we need to develop fusion. That is the path to prosperity for humanity.
And ESG is set by BlackRock.
Well, BlackRock is the largest ESG investor,
Yeah.
and now they have the largest Bitcoin ETF. So by default, Bitcoin is green now. And if you look at the media, the coverage is suddenly turned favorable. Like Bitcoin is good for the environment now. In the past, it was bad.
Yeah, so it's really just a narrative.
It is. But there's always a reason behind the narrative. Follow the money,
Yeah.
right? Like who benefits from the green initiative? It's certain companies.
Okay, there's no energy shortage and countries can convert that to Bitcoin. And you said governments actually buy in this logic.
Well, we're getting closer, I
Right.
think. And it's going to be a lot of work to educate them.
Yeah.
But I think the game theory of competition will push things forward, that the governments will understand that we need Bitcoin. And they may not understand all the benefits of Bitcoin and why they want Bitcoin and what money is, but they'll just see the US wants to accumulate a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Well, maybe we should get one too.
Yeah.
And that's okay, right?
Yeah.
You can't expect everyone to understand everything, but if they stay competitive, then it should keep the playing field level.
How do you actually get to these officials?
So usually we get introductions from people in different countries on the ground. They want us to meet with the government because they are Bitcoiners and they see the need for strategic Bitcoin reserves
Yeah.
for their country for
Yeah.
various reasons. So they'll make the introductions and then we go in, we meet with the president, and it takes time. I think we met with the president of Colombia last year, and just now we're starting to see some things move. But it's like moving a big oil tanker. It takes time to turn.
It also takes time for them to learn about it.
Yeah, but
It is-
sometimes you can bypass that just by, competition. You see someone else getting it, you want it. So that's my hope. Yeah. So
Very
I would say if you want to help Jan3 with our mission to spread Bitcoin adoption around the world, then help us make connections. Help us meet with politicians. Everyone is connected to everyone else through 6 degrees of separation. So we find that people, if they try hard, they can engineer a meeting with the Minister of Finance or the Prime Minister or President. So in my talk at ABS yesterday, I had a slide up and I said, Taiwan's goal should be to accumulate 83,000 Bitcoin.
Why 83?
So my talk was about all the different holdings of Bitcoin by different countries and corporations now, and ETFs as well. So the US ETFs are the largest chunk of it.
Yeah.
800,000 some odd BTC. But my next slide was gold holdings. So the US is the giant there for gold, followed by other countries. But Taiwan is actually up there with, I think, 422 tons of gold. And then you have the UK with 310 tons of gold. So Taiwan's gold holdings are pretty decent.
Okay.
And it's 35% larger than the UK's gold holdings. So my rationale is that your Bitcoin holdings in Taiwan should be at least 35% larger than the UK, which is at 60,000. So you should have 83,000, simply because you have that much gold
Right.
in relation to everyone else. But also 83,000, it's roughly 1% of GDP. So Taiwan GDP is 760 billion. So 1% of that will be enough to buy 83,000 Bitcoin, depending on when you buy it. The question is, strategically, is there a 1% chance that the US dollar will be gone in 10 years? Or the US will default on its debt? Or will Bitcoin become the dominant form of trade settlement, international trade settlement around the world? If there's a 1% chance, then it makes sense to put 1% of GDP for 1 year annually into Bitcoin. At least I think so.
Usually we assume when there's war, Bitcoin price will go up. With what happened in the Middle East, the price still dropped because it followed the traditional finance market.
Yeah.
So how should we look at it?
Well, it'll follow until it doesn't follow, right? These things are just very sudden. Right now, the bulk of the market seems to think Bitcoin is a tech stock still.
Yeah.
And the ETFs are a double-edged sword. So now Bitcoin is part of the financial system, right? Through exposure by the ETFs. But at the same time, it's not in the financial system. It exists separate from the financial system. But it has this attack surface.
Yeah.
Because it's a portal to legacy money. You have the portal for money to come in, but at the same time, you're now anchored to the stock market. And when stocks go down, people need to rebalance or adjust or top up because they might be on leverage. So in those cases, you want to sell what's in the green still, right? And if you look at Bitcoin since the ETF's launch, it's the best performing probably out of all the basket, right? Things like Nvidia were already down. So a lot of people were probably selling their ETF holdings and that pushed down Bitcoin. Or they just sold Bitcoin because it was the only market open during the weekend, right? I think if you understand Bitcoin, you understand the fundamentals of the market structure intertwined with Bitcoin, then you understand these are all temporary things. It's very short term. Long term, Bitcoin will keep appreciating to 1 million a coin, to 3 million a coin, to 10 million a coin, etc. But you'll have these challenges in the meantime. And the thing you have to do is look past it and understand what is the market structure and why Bitcoin will follow.
In the future, let's say in 20 years, how many Bitcoin do you need to be seen as doing okay?
I think 1 Bitcoin will be pretty good.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not enough for the world population, though.
No, like no one will have 1 Bitcoin.
Really?
It'll probably be, I did the calculation. You have 258,258 Satoshis. That's the distribution if you take 21 million Bitcoin and divide it by 8 million people.
But that's not going to happen.
It will.
Some people will have a lot more.
Well, some people, yeah. So that is the best case scenario, and we know that's already not possible.
Yeah.
So maybe the reality is you might have 10,000 Satoshis, like the poker chip. That's the max that people will have.
Wow. Exciting but terrifying.
I think it's just a restoration. If you look at the world today, like, why are we talking about debt in the billions and trillions? That's a lot of zeros.
Yeah.
That's not normal. Again, like, if you go back to the 70s, 60s, you buy a hamburger with 10 cents, you make dollars, you save dollars, and if you have thousands of dollars, you're living a good life, right? And somehow from there, we went to trillions in debt. The U.S. debt right now is 35 trillion, but the total with real liabilities is probably 175 trillion. That's a lot of zeros.
I always wonder, do people actually try to solve that problem, or is it just...
Well, this is the thing. It's all coming to a head. So either they'll default or they have to rebase. And I think they can rebase on Bitcoin. So 35 trillion in debt, you can cover that with 350,000 Bitcoin if you just say, we will pay the debt in Satoshis. So 100 millionth of a Bitcoin. And Trump was on air saying, maybe we give them a little bit of Bitcoin to pay the debt. I don't know if he understood my math and reasoning, but that is generally what's going to happen.
Right.
Because when currencies fail, what do governments do and central banks do? They make a new one.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, now 1 million of this is one of this. So you just say, well, $1 is now 1 Satoshi. And 350,000 Bitcoin pays the debt. Everyone's happy. Or you default. You choose the pain.
I see why you said it might happen 5 to 10 years.
The thing about debt is it compounds, interest compounds.
Yeah.
So either you default or you need to print. And if you print, then it becomes worthless. So all the central banks around the world are stuck between a rock and a hard place. So this is why the sooner the countries adopt Bitcoin, the better it will be. Because you can gradually ease into this new financial system built on Bitcoin, rebased on Bitcoin. And the first movers will have the biggest advantage, right? So if Taiwan bought 83,000 Bitcoin today, that's just less than 1% of GDP. But if Bitcoin is at 1 million, you'll need, well, 10x that. You need 10% of GDP.
Do you actually think it's going to go to 1 million?
Yeah.
How long does it take?
I think within the next year.
Really? A mil?
Yeah.
A Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin has done a lot of 20x's, 17x, 20x's in
Right.
months.
Yeah.
Maybe 9 months in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
We did a 20x. So if Bitcoin is sitting at 100K, which I think we should be, 10x of that, not even 20, will get us to $1 million.
Do we even have that much money in the market? It's already a big market cap.
You mean Bitcoin?
Yeah.
It's like 1 trillion something.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, that's the market cap of Nvidia.
Isn't Nvidia down?
Yeah, well, at its peak, right?
Yeah.
And then if you 10x that, that's like 10 Nvidias. Does the market have that capacity?
If you're rebasing the entire world's financial system to Bitcoin, that's a lot of things to fill, like 1 Satoshi for $1, right? You have the real estate market. You have derivatives. You have so many things. It's not just M2 money, not just cash and everything else. You're repricing the entire world economy in terms of Bitcoin. So I think 1 Satoshi, $1 is a reasonable end path for everything. But if you think of the number we said, like maybe the average person will have 10,000 Satoshis,
Yeah.
right? That's like a good amount of money for someone back when dollars were worth something, right? You have $10,000. That buys you a decent amount of stuff, a house. at
Not
least.
right now.
No, not right now.
No.
But that's why the money is ending, right? If you look at the past 100 years from 1924 to now, the dollar has basically gone to zero. So it is happening, but no one is really seeing it. It's just the problem of the frog in the pot. It's boiling, but it's boiling slowly, so the frog doesn't want to jump out. But when you're in Bitcoin, you see the pot because you're outside of that situation, and you see the frog in the pot. So then you understand what's happening. And I think it's our responsibility to try to educate the world about the state of the system and where it's going to end up inevitably.
What is your view on any other crypto except for Bitcoin?
I think it's all a distraction.
Right. So Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that you recognize.
Yeah, so I was at one of the events here
Yeah.
last night, and someone asked me, and I just told, like, they said, what is the difference between Bitcoin and crypto? And the difference is anybody can make a crypto project. You can do one.
Yes, yes.
Anybody can make one.
Yeah.
Nobody can make Bitcoin again.
Here's the question. So I believe there's a small group of people that know who Satoshi is.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
How is it possible?
Because he was really good at hiding his identity.
Are you Satoshi?
No, I'm
Because
not.
he's pointing at you.
I'm not.
So you don't believe there's someone that know the real identity?
I don't think so. People will guess, but
Yeah.
I don't think anyone can find him through any means. He was very clever at hiding his
Yeah.
facts.
But, recently, or not recently, a few months ago, there's like reveal of emails and all that, you know. You don't think there'll be a day where people actually find out who that person is?
I don't think so.
How can one person in this world just hide?
He was very good at what he did. He didn't leak his IP address. When he bought a domain, it's not trackable. I think he paid with Bitcoin or something. But like, there is no path back. And now he disappeared.
Yeah.
It's even harder. I think he was rock solid in his OPSEC.
Hypothetically, in theory, if a person actually reveal the identity of Satoshi, is it going to be devastating for Bitcoin?
I don't think anyone can prove he is, not with the amount of evidence that we've managed to collect. So there's no way to prove it. He could come out and prove it himself by
Transfer.
using a key,
Right.
signing something.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't think so. If he wanted to come back, he would have come back, when Bitcoin was worth something. Because when he left, it was still not very valuable, right? So if he can hold out when Bitcoin was worth, I don't know, $1 billion, he can definitely hold out now. Or he's destroyed the ability to move coins or sign for transactions too. Maybe he knew there will be a temptation in the future, so he just deleted everything.
What do you think the mission is for him?
It's hard to say. I mean, I don't like to guess, but I think it has to do with fixing the money. If you look at the newspaper headline, if you look at some of the things that he seems interested in, like eCash, they're all ways to protect people. It's a very cypherpunk ethos. It's about sovereignty, permissionlessness, writing code, and fixing the world.
What is your reason of being in Bitcoin?
It's fixing the world.
So you got attracted or you got into Bitcoin because of this decentralization idea, or?
Well, decentralization is a means to an end.
Right.
The end that I think a lot of Bitcoiners want is to fix the world. So it's a better place where you don't have a 1984 scenario, right? That we're not tracked like cattle and everything you do and say is monitored. There's really no counter force to that aside from Bitcoin, right? Because technology tends towards centralization. It always is that way. Once you get there, it's hard to break out of it unless there's a very powerful counterforce, which is Bitcoin, which is completely decentralized. So without Bitcoin, there's really no hope. That's why I'm pushing so hard to get Bitcoin adoption and awareness about Bitcoin.
Has your thought changed over the years? Let's say Bitcoin hit all-time high. You're like, oh, I have all this Bitcoin. I could change that to a yacht or like a mansion.
I think all that stuff is very distracting. Like, it's more maintenance, it's more work than it's worth. It's better just to rent it, right?
Okay.
But I think some people like to show off and get a
Own
fancy car
things,
or a
yeah.
fancy boat.
Oh, do you think in the future we will own nothing and just rent?
No, I think people will own things.
Right.
I mean, that's the WEF thing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
own nothing and be
Yeah.
happy. No, I think if anything, we will have better property rights because I think with Bitcoin, it teaches people again why property rights are important because you understand that owning something is important, right? And aside from Bitcoin, you can't really own anything else. So you learn that the entire system of property rights and laws to protect property rights is actually very weak. Like again, in Canada, your bank account can be frozen. If you own real estate, it can still be seized. And there's a eminent domain or appropriation. So if the government wants your land, they can technically force you to sell it. So I think, if anything, Bitcoin will increase property rights across the board. It probably won't happen in the next 5 years, but in 20, 30 years, we should see the respect of property rights permeate through the legacy system.
You're trying to push Bitcoin adoption through the government, but the end game is everyone using Bitcoin. How do you actually get everyone on board? Is it a wallet? There are countries where people don't have a smartphone yet. So like how exactly is that going to happen?
That's why we're building Aqua. So that's another piece of the puzzle, which is creating a very accessible wallet that anybody can use, that we can hide a lot of the complexity. So if you want to just send Bitcoin, it just works. There's no complexity with things like channel management. If you're using Lightning Network, you don't need to set up a Lightning node. We can do swaps to pay Lightning invoices. We're incorporating Tether into Aqua as well because we see that as a vehicle to onboard a lot of people to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So in the global south, most of the people there are trying to protect their wealth, their savings, and they're doing that by using USDT. And maybe there's 100 million people doing that, but they're not into Bitcoin because they don't understand that. But they did seek out Tether,
Yeah.
and they are using Tether for everyday purchases, just living life. So it's become their digital dollar. And I think what we can do with Aqua is bridge them into Bitcoin because most of the wallets that are powering stablecoins, they have their own altcoin chain, right?
Yeah.
Either Ethereum, Tron, or whatever. But with Aqua, it's all Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin and Liquid. So it's a Bitcoin and a side chain. So we can get them into the Bitcoin ecosystem that way. At least that's the hope.
Does it look like an app? Like I'm trying to visualize how to get everybody, like my grandma who's like 80, to be on board. Like, is it going to look like an app
Yeah.
that you scan or
It's just
Apple Pay?
Yeah. Well, it'll be using QR codes or Lightning addresses, but you'll be able to just, ask your grandma for her Lightning address and send Bitcoin to her that way.
Does that take a lot of education though?
Well, I think there's still a lot of UI work to be done, but we can make it far smoother and simpler for the mass market. Because right now, I think most Bitcoin wallets don't really seem to be targeting the next billion people. they're building something for people that are already in Bitcoin and are already advanced users. Whereas for us, we want to make it so easy for people to use this. It just makes sense and they understand it and it just works.
When Bitcoin spot ETF came out, I had mixed feelings. On one hand, it's getting the recognition and, it's a new asset class now. And on the other hand, it doesn't seem like, big companies or issuers owning that much Bitcoin is decentralized. So I want to know your thought. Is this just a process or a step closer to everyone having Bitcoin, but then all the Bitcoin is with them?
Well, it doesn't really matter. So Bitcoin is based on proof of work,
Right.
which means you have to mine it.
Yeah.
Ethereum, I think, is in danger with the ETFs because if it gets centralized with a custodian, then effectively they control it because it's proof of stake.
Right.
So if you have the biggest stake by default through proxy, through investors, then you control the network, and they can change the rules of the network that way, right?
But
Bitcoin,
they can't really.
with Bitcoin, you can't because you can just have it, but having it doesn't impact the network itself, like being able to transact it, the rules of the network, and mining of the asset, right? It's not connected at all.
Right.
So with proof of stake systems, the rich get richer. It's actually a direct parallel to the fiat system. If you're rich, you get richer. With Bitcoin, you don't. Having Bitcoin doesn't make you richer. Bitcoin appreciating against other things does make you richer, but that's all relative, right? But having more does not make more. So you don't have that snowball effect where the rich keep getting richer over time.
I see.
Whereas with proof of stake systems, that is exactly what you get. You get the same thing now, but with a blockchain and with, Vitalik.
There are people in this world that are so rich. They're richer than a lot of countries already, but they're just, people don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And those are people that hold a lot of Bitcoin. And at one point, they'll be so rich, they can have their own army. And it just sounds like we're going back to like where, you have your own castle, your own army, and you're richer than a country. So,
I mean, MicroStrategy is richer than many countries in Bitcoin
Yeah.
terms too.
yeah.
So if Bitcoin does go to 1 million or 10 million, you'll have that case where a corporation is wealthier than many countries.
And you think that's happening now?
Well, there's no way to counter that. Like, what do you do? Like, then you go into collectivism, right? Like, okay, you have too much Bitcoin. We're going to take some from you and divide it up amongst everyone else just for equity, right? But I think it's just an inevitable end state. You will always have concentration of wealth in people that had foresight.
Right.
And I don't think there's that much you can do about it.
If you're a 30-year-old that's watching this show, how much Bitcoin do you think that person should have to retire comfortably?
I don't know. I think you should not think about how much Bitcoin you should have to retire. You should find ways to create value where you can have a steady stream of income, which you can allocate to Bitcoin.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So
I
let's
think
say
if you want to get rich and just get Bitcoin and never do anything else, I don't think that will end well. It's better to have
right.
a fiat mining operation
Yeah,
that
yeah,
can
yeah.
convert to
Bitcoin.
In this day and age right now,
Yeah.
with the price at 55, you should try to get one Bitcoin in the next year or so, if you can, or at least half a Bitcoin. I'd say this is attainable by most people if they really hustle and they work hard.
Depends on the country.
Yeah, depending on
yeah.
the country.
What does your day look like?
So I also have a game company. We're building a game called Infinite Fleet. So I split my time between that and Bitcoin stuff. But both things I'm very passionate about because I like building games and building game universes. And I like getting Bitcoin adoption because I think it's beneficial for the world.
How Bitcoin friendly do you think Taiwan is right now?
I don't know. I'm trying to find out on this trip. But it seems that people I've talked to have said Taiwan is very conservative. And therefore, nothing will happen. And my counterpoint to that is it is possible to be so conservative that you become reckless. There is a desire to be conservative, not to rock the boat, to follow someone else, to wait for the right time. But there's a cost to that as well. There's two costs. One is that you miss it. The second is that you can't even get it at the later point, right? If you look at Bitcoin, I still think people don't really understand that there's a limit of 21 million, right? So if you look at the US ETFs, they have 800,000, MicroStrategy 200 some odd thousand, and then various countries with 190 in China, 190,000, the US with 118,000 Bitcoin. There's not a lot of Bitcoin left.
And a lot are lost.
A lot are lost, but there's just not a lot left.
Yeah.
And then the US, you have two presidential candidates talking about creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Robert Kennedy wants to get 4 million Bitcoin. I don't think it's possible. That's 20% of the supply.
Yeah.
And then Trump wants to put like 200 something thousand in at least, right? But there's not that much left. So the risk is if you wait too long and you wait for the right, we wait for the signal, then the opportunities pass. So if you look at the US and the ETFs, a lot of countries waited for the US to greenlight the ETFs.
Yeah.
If you wait for the signal from
Right.
who you think is the leader, that is a disservice to your country and to the people of the country, because you weren't able to reason from first principles that we should probably do this because it is de-risking on the legacy system and there's a limited supply. So how much Bitcoin will you get at that point? I don't know. So Taiwan could have 83,000 if it acted now. Maybe if you wait 2 years, you only have half of that. Wait 2 more years, maybe you get a tenth of that. Maybe you have 8,000 if you're lucky, because everything is moving at light speed. It's not going to wait for anyone. So the time is really now. And that's why we're working so hard to engage in the hopes that someone listens. The market will always settle everything. The market will always win. So if you wait, you'll get what you deserve.
Do you think in the future or near future that the richest country right now won't be the richest country?
Yeah, definitely.
And some countries that we think are not so rich won't be the richest countries?
I think so, because it has to do with realizing what money is. So you're going to have the LATAM countries that just want money to come in so that they can grow, right? They're starved for investments. But there's an opportunity now to shake things up, because many of the poorer countries have energy reserves. So the largest geothermal reserves, I think, is the Philippines, then Indonesia. And historically, they're kind of poor. They're relatively poor countries because you can't monetize that energy. If you have oil and you're in the Middle East, you bring it up, put it in barrels and ship it overseas to somebody.
Yeah.
But with geothermal, what do? What you can do now is simply build a Bitcoin mining facility and mine Bitcoin and then export Bitcoin to the world. So there's a big opportunity now, both in terms of realization, understanding of what money is and wanting money, and the opportunity to monetize energy. The dynamic of the world is going to shift. How much it shifts, it depends on the powers that be and the governments. But there's a real opportunity to change the entire face of the planet economically.
I still see people leaving comments like, oh, what happens if Bitcoins are all mined? So can you tell them what happens after?
Well, I think when it's all mined, then the transaction fees will be what the miners get. But the evolution of Bitcoin mining is that Bitcoin mining and energy production just become one thing. It's not that you have a Bitcoin mining company.
Oh.
You'll be an energy company that mines Bitcoin because you need it to balance the grid.
Yeah.
People really need to learn more about the world and how things work.
Yeah.
Like, every energy grid needs a base load, a reliable base load. You can't just have solar in the daytime when there's sunlight and then it goes off, right? You need reliable base load, and base load comes from either coal or nuclear. If you have base load and there's no demand, you have to do something with it. So they'll be using that to mine Bitcoin. And if we get into the age of energy abundance with nuclear power, they'll just use it to mine, to balance their grid, or just to offload some energy. So it'll just be one and the same. It won't be like I am a company and I mine Bitcoin. I buy electricity from the power company. It'll just be one company that produces energy and mines Bitcoin, and secures the network. When I was designing the Bitcoin bonds for El Salvador, I was modeling out Bitcoin price appreciation, and I decided to go with 60% annual growth because in the 5-year period before, we also had 60% median growth.
Right.
And also, if you go back like 7 years, it's also 60% median. But if you project that out forward, by 2033, Bitcoin should be at $3 million a coin. And that's conservative. So if you look at it, 60% sounds pretty small, right? But in the previous 5 years, when it is 60% median annual growth, you have some years where we did go up 10, 17x, 20x's, right? You have these large spikes.
Right.
So the question is, why wouldn't we have a large spike sooner and see 1 million before, 2028 or something, right? And I think given the state of the current financial system, everything breaking, debt spiraling, interest payments spiraling, I think we'll just see it sooner. So I just think in the next trimester of that 10-year projection, so here we are now, in 10 years, 3 million, maybe that 1 million mark will happen in the first trimester. So sooner than later.
Thank you so much, Samson.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you.
谢谢你看到这里哦，欢迎用下面的连结到 Line 跟 Discord 群组，跟努力的大家一起讨论。我们在 OKX、币安、派网呢，跟其他的大交易所都帮大家争取到了最高8折 20% off 的交易手续费减免。用下面的连结注册呢，你的交易成本就更低了。也欢迎告诉我你接下来想要看什么，我们在币圈继续努力，下一次见，拜拜。